May 7th, 1945 dawned as a cool, drizzly day in Portage County, but not a single person cared that the weather was depressing. At 8 p.m. the previous evening, Edward R. Murrow had broken into the musical presentation on CBS radio to announce that Germany had signed a surrender agreement at General Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims, France. One theater of the war was closed, but the battles in the Pacific raged on. The Windham Bombers were well prepared to defend their league championship, but another type of bomber preempted their anticipation. On August 6th, 1 month before football practice was to begin, and after 6 months of intensive firebombing of the Japanese mainland, President Harry S. Truman ordered the innocently named Little Boy atomic bomb to be dropped on Hiroshima, landing directly on top of the city's largest hospital and killing 90% of Hiroshima's doctors. 140,000 Japanese civilians were instantly incinerated. 3 days later, the more ominously named Fat Man fell on Nagasaki. And 6 days later, the most horrific war in world history was over. The day after Japan surrendered, the Atlas Powder Company, the operating contractor for the Ordnance Center in the Ravenna Arsenal, began layoffs, which by the end of September, less than 6 weeks later, included its entire workforce of 5,200 people. As a new day dawned for America, a post-war recession and population reorganization began in Windham. On that day, preparations began for civilian usage of the Maple Grove project. Loris Troyer, a name many of us are familiar with, wrote in the Record Courier that Maple Grove had been a mistake from the start. The largest housing project in Ohio was to have accommodated 2,000 families, but at its peak, only 431 units had been occupied. Half of the 2,000 units had never been built at all, the material having been shipped to a site in Michigan. The Projector, that mimeograph newspaper from the project, denied that the Maple Grove project would be immediately closed and evacuated, noting that contracts for redecoration of 100 units had not been canceled. The Great Atlantic and Pacific grocery chain, however, closed its Windham store in anticipation of a great emigration. No one knew what was to happen in this village, which had experienced the greatest population explosion in the entire United States during the decade of the 1940s. Worries about the town's future drowned out the news that Louis Shoemaker, after 1 year of glory, had resigned from Windham and moved on. Windham now had its 4th coach in 3 years, and the man who took the reins would soon become a coaching legend in his own right. Gordon MacDonald was the son of a Kent, Ohio minister. He had recently returned to America after 3 years of active war duty, hoping to catch on as a science teacher somewhere near his home. He had been a varsity tennis player at Ohio University before the war. That he knew a little bit about football was good enough for new Superintendent R. Brown Jenkins to sign him on as head coach. That he had a lot to learn about six-man football soon became evident. And he did not have the greatest six-man coach in Ohio history to help him. Dean Eberwein had resigned as principal and superintendent. Resigned to leave Ohio. Resigned to leave education. Resigned to head to Florida, with which he had fallen in love. Eberwein was a Windham High School graduate. He was a Hiram College graduate. that he had gone to the University of Florida for his freshman year, and he had never gotten the Sunshine State out of his blood. Uprooting his young family, he headed to the Tartan Springs area, where he established first a dredging company, then became a real estate broker, taught scuba diving, and late in life became the public relations director for an underwater ballet troupe called the Wiki Wachi Mermaids. He left a football legacy that Gordon MacDonald would be hard-pressed to fill. The new coach had a wealth of players, so many that the county yearbook reported that they didn't have enough uniforms and had to share depending on who was in the game at any given time. Sending a defending league championship on the field for the first game in late September, MacDonald saw his boys fall 43-26 to Manaway Village. Now, he had a veteran team, but he himself had not settled on any single style of play. His starters included Art Chafee and Buffer Smith at end, Gordon Bertram at center, Bob Garrett at fullback, and two newcomers, John Kane and a lad named Freddie Reichelderfer at the other back position. Now, Reichelderfer was a decent passer, but he was later to become more famous for the Freddie Burgers that he used to pass to his patrons at the Brick Tavern in Garrettsville. MacDonald had a goodly number of substitutes to choose from. Dale Rarick, Harry Marty, Jerry Williams, Robert Blake, Ted Semplak, Robert Nathan, and a skinny rookie whose birth certificate said Raymond Myers, but whom everybody called Izzy. For his second game, MacDonald relied almost exclusively on passes, and the Shalersville Rams had a field day with interceptions on their way to a 34-6 shellacking. In the third game against Hiram, he ordered Reichelderfer to throw more passes to center Gordon Bertram, who scored Windham's only touchdown in a 34-14 nightmare. It was becoming truly the season from hell. In desperation, the novice coach moved Bob Garrett from fullback to passing halfback. The Bomber faithful screamed in horror at this rookie move. Bob Garrett was left-handed, and everybody knows that left-handers make terrible passers. But Bob Garrett didn't know it. The combination of Bob Garrett to Buffer Smith was the ingredient that MacDonald was looking for. In their first game together, Smith caught 3 touchdown passes and Garrett ran for one in a 26-6 win over Deerfield that at least stopped the bleeding. The next game against Manaway Township would show whether MacDonald had turned things around. 50-0, with Garrett scoring 4 touchdowns, showed that he had. A close loss to a powerful Nelson squad the next week didn't change his mind. Garrett to Smith clicked for 2 more touchdowns in that game, and a final game win over Charlestown, 32-16, at least ended the season on a high note. This victory was buried in the sports section as Edmund Peppard from Shalersville erupted for 8 touchdowns to set an all-time league scoring record. On that same day, Manaway Village beat Nelson for the league championship. A Manaway Village team coached by a man named Ken Folger, the man who had guided the Bombers for 2 years. And Windham fans could not even drown their sorrows over the miserable season at the local bars. On November 6, 1945, Windham voters approved an election issue which outlawed all liquor sales in the entire township except 3-2 beer.